boyfriend's new partner, or I can become best friends with my partner's other partner, that we don't have to fall into this sense of like, oh, obviously the other woman that your partner's dating, like you must hate each other's guts, that it doesn't have to be that actually, no, we can proactively choose for these relationships to be good and to be uplifting and to be fortifying to our lives as human beings. So yeah, I think that's what I end up coming back to as like the best parts, or like the things that make me the happiest about being polyamorous.
I think it's related too to what Emily was saying about maintaining your autonomy and not getting lost in a relationship, because I think most people out there have had the experience of having a really good friend who gets into a romantic relationship and then basically just disappears from your life, at least for a while, because they sort of get like sucked into that relationship where it's the only thing they ever want to do or think about or any of that. And that how you were describing that situation where you can have multiple partners as well as their other partners and exes who are friends and also just friends, that there is kind of this sense of, by being in a relationship, I'm not closing myself off from everyone else I know, but instead, am still open to the rest of my connections, whether they're romantic or not.
It takes away that sense of competition that I think in America especially we have so ingrained within us that, we have to be the best, that you have to have a best friend or you have to have the one that you're always with and always doing everything with. And instead, like, going back to that sense of tribalism, that we are all in this together in this, like, great big challenging thing called life. And it's easier to do when you have multiple people doing it with you and not so frickin' awful and hard because there's only one other person with me at all times. And, sometimes we hate each other and sometimes we get angry at each other. Instead, you're moving forward together. And that brings us to our next big one, which is, what are some misconceptions of polyamory?
There are so many. One that I encounter a lot is that polyamory is just something that you do while you're young, or if you don't want to have any serious relationships, or if you don't want to get married, or if you don't want to have kids, then polyamory is for you. And that's patently untrue for a number of reasons. First of all, like a lot of people who are polyamorous are also raising kids or are getting married, are building homes and building nests where maybe they are raising their children with multiple parents, or maybe they're co-parenting with one person, but then they have another partner who lives outside of the home that's still involved in the child's life. So definitely, whether you want your relationships to be casual or super, super serious, people still make polyamory work. I know for myself that that's actually, again, that's one of my favorite parts about it, is being able to have more of the good stuff that a really long-term, deeply intimate, emotionally connected relationship brings. That I enjoy that, and that for me, it's not just about like me kind of waiting around until I actually find the one, or waiting around until I find the one person I want to settle down with. Like, no, like I found my ones. There are multiple ones, and that's why I'm keeping them in my life. So I think that's a really common one that I come up against.
And the fact that today now there are people who are third generation poly people, whose grandparents were polyamorous and their parents were, that this is definitely not something that's only limited to young people and it's just a phase and it can't last and isn't committed. There's a really good book, or two really good books by Dr. Elizabeth Sheff that specifically study polyamorous families. So I would recommend checking those out too. That's called The Polyamorous Next Door and Stories from the Polycule are those two books. The next misconception I wanted to bring up is this one, that polyamory is for people who just want to have lots of sex, or it's for people who are sex addicts, or, right, that it's just all about having lots of sex. And the thing I always like to respond to this is, if your goal is to just have a lot of sex with a lot of different people, polyamory is not the way to do that. The easiest way to do that is just to be a single person who's dating, and live in a city will probably help too. Right. But seriously, polyamory is something that involves actual open and honest communication with people, before in polyamory, before people have sex, there's often a lot more conscious conversation about the fact that we're going to have sex, about our STI status, about our safe sex practices, about using protection, about all of that, as well as our other partners.
About who else, yeah, exactly, about who else
Yes.
you are sleeping with and what kind of, safe sex practices you're using with them.
Right. As opposed to a lot of people who are just casually dating, just kind of, let's just not talk about it. Let's just not think about it too much, and aren't as proactive because it's not built on this foundation of honesty and communication.
Yeah.
The other thing is that you can be polyamorous and not have any sex at all. In fact, polyamory also has a lot of overlap with people in the asexual community. And these are people who don't have sexual desire. They actually just don't want to have sex. They might think people are beautiful. They're still able to have orgasms, but they just don't have that desire for sex the way that other people like myself do. And that polyamory is a place for them too, because it's about having romantic, emotional, committed, real relationships, just not with sexual exclusivity. And so I would say that myth that polyamory is just about having lots of sex couldn't be farther from true. I think a lot of the people I know who have more sex than anyone I know are either single people or people in monogamous relationships where the two of them both are just crazy about having sex all the time.
Finally, the last misconception we wanted to talk about was that everybody who is in a polyamorous relationship is in one giant relationship with each other. Like, say, when I was in a relationship with Jace, then Jace was also in a relationship with my partner, Josh, and then Dedeker was in a relationship with all of us. And that's not always the case by any means. Often,
I think people have this idea that it's like, oh, if you meet someone new you're interested in, do you have to introduce them to all your other partners and their partners, and they all have to approve that they can join your poly family?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think a lot of people picked that up unfortunately from the polyamory married and dating reality show that was on HBO.
Sister Wives or something.
Yes,
yeah.
because
that too. Yeah.
Because those shows definitely established we're a triad, or we're a three-person relationship, and it's if you want to date someone else, you need to get approval from all of us, and that is such a not common practice.
Yeah,
in the polyamorous
can be a lot
community.
of things.
Yeah, and I think people think that it's you become the polyamory board of directors or something when you're all in a relationship together.
Yeah, and most of the time it's just going to be, two people relationships. They're in a relationship with each other, and then I have a relationship with someone else, and they have a relationship with someone else, and they're not necessarily triads or multi-person relationships, just two people.
That Emily mentioned earlier, that there can be these 3-person or 4-person or even more relationships, but those are so much more rare.
So rare.
Yeah.
Right? I think we all understand how difficult it can be to find just one other person that you really connect with and, have this deep connection that you want to keep continuing with them. To find that not only do you have that with one person, but also with another person who also happens to have that with that other person, that the odds of that are much lower. It is much more difficult to find, if you're even looking for it. And a lot of poly people I know aren't even looking for that. They just want to be able to have the relationships that they have with multiple people. They're not trying to put together some big, double king-size bed sleeping situation.
Well, I suppose this leads into the next question, which is, do your partners interact with each other at all?
Definitely. I mean, there's a term called metamors, so that is your partner's partner, right? Your partner's partner.
Yeah, your partner's other partner other than you.
Other than you, yeah. And so you are a metamor with your partner's partner. And you share a partner, essentially. And I think we definitely encourage people to have responsible, good, open communication in their relationships with their metamors, just because that's a good thing to do. It's good to be aware and open and honest with everyone involved, and to have someone on your team, say hey, I want to get together with my metamor and plan a big birthday surprise for our partner, which is something that Jace did with one of Dedeker's partners recently for her birthday, and it was amazing and beautiful.
It was the most romantic thing anyone's ever done for me.
Exactly. And like, how cool is that? Because partners get to come together and do that collectively for their person.